Alright, we're back doing another toolbox takeoff here for the window restoration, and this specifically is the toolbox that I put together for reinstallation of the windows. And that's the only time I used this setup. And some of the tools bleed over between the previous toolbox that I did and this toolbox. And this was nothing more than the 5-gallon bucket you see on the table holding all of this material, because I did not actually use anything in the bucket. Everything came out every time I did windows, and it laid out in a specific pattern of how I used it when reinstalling the windows. Because I basically had two workstations. You had the ladder and the floor that I was working off of. The floor is where I did all my cutting, hole punching, measuring, etc. And the ladders where I actually worked off of to install. So I'm going to pause this real quick and do some close-ups and go over all the tools that you're seeing here on the bench. Okay, so I'm going to start from the left here. These are leftover bags, and you can see like that one says 212, so that was window 212. Basically, when I disassembled a window, all the hardware for that window went in a single bag, and it stayed in that bag to keep it all organized, so all that hardware went back to that window. And so as I finished up putting windows in, I just accumulated the bags, and that's what's the remnants there. This bag over here was just for holding stuff, and this is just stainless steel tack nails for the weather strip in the bulk bin that I bought it in. All right, so what you see here are two wooden strips, and you're going to see that that has a little groove in it with a glued in piece of wood, so you can take this guy and slide it. And the purpose of this, actually let me use the smaller one so I can keep it in the view here. Purpose is I'd hold this tight, and I'd use that to measure my jam to jam to determine how long my weather strip needed to be for at the top of the window and at the bottom of the window. And I found that if I extended that till it touched and then just eased it out ever so slightly and measured it without moving it, I got a very accurate measurement, and it was very fast. And I wasn't trying to guess at the bend of the tape rule and all that good stuff on how that measurement played out. So that's what they are. There's different lengths of them for different width of windows based on what I was working with. We're going to run across the back here first. So this box here just contains my stainless steel nails that I used to tack on the weather strip. I bought them and they came in little bins like this. I'd empty those into here, only so much at a time. That way if I ever spilled it, which did happen once, it wasn't as big of a mess to clean up. And I just replenished this as I used it. One of the very first tools you use in the reinstallation is this guy right here. And this is what allows me to restring the sash weights. And the story behind this is just a piece of cotton string. And I have a hook on here from fishing, so I can easily disconnect and reconnect it. And these are not strong enough to pull on with the weights on it, but it is strong enough to pull the chain up to where I can grab it with my hand. And you'll have to see the installation of a window video in order to understand the full concept of this. But this has to be readily removable and then hook onto the end of the chain so you can pull it up through the weight cavity, through the pulley, and then be able to get it with your hand and pull the weight into everything. This is a piece of lead that is easily bendable with a hole in it for the string to wrap through. Fortunately, a previous worker on my windows was using this, and their string must have dropped and it fell down into the sash weight cavity, and they did not retrieve it. So I found it in one of the first windows I worked on, and it has been an absolute miracle tool that I don't know if I would have come up with something as ingenious as this, but it works really well, and it has some nice weight to it, so it pulls the string down. Awesome. This is just an absolutely awesome tool. It's something that you will have to make. You're not going to buy that in a store. Moving along here, we got some basic hardware, and I should open these up. These are the coils that hold the sash chain, which is this right here, in the edge of the window. The sash chain goes on the coil, and then the coil pushes into the hole, and it secures everything in place. And then these are hooks that secure the sash chain to the sash weights. And I just bought these because it was a quick and easy way to do it. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You don't have to use these, but I found that the efficiency and the low cost of them made it very functional option, very practical. This is just leftover because you can't buy just two, you got to buy whole packs. Those are there in case I lost some of them. These are just different drops of the weather strip that I used when installing the windows. This is bronze, whereas this is zinc coated metal. This is a nicer product, but it's also significantly more expensive. For me to have gone with the bronze option on my project would have cost almost another $2,000 versus this, and this was still very expensive. So this is something I've had from another project I worked on, and it just wasn't in the cards for the budget on this job, but I have it anyways just to keep track of. This is just a box of sash chain that I bought because some of my windows did not have chain. They still had the old rope, and the vast majority of them have already been converted to chain, so I went ahead and converted anything that wasn't chain to chain, and that's what that is. Now, what you see here are the remnants of some hardware, screws and nuts, and no good project doesn't have leftover hardware. The bolt nuts somebody was using as a spacer. I don't know. I don't know why you need nuts for these wood window sashes. And the rest of these are just extra pieces of hardware. Some of it's because the hardware was busted and I replaced it, so maybe these are the screws left from that particular hardware. These guys were used, and they're shorter. They're replacement screws, and they weren't long enough that somebody used in the past, so I replaced them with the correct length screws. So that's there. This is another piece of that weather strip that's a little longer, so you can kind of see. That's for the bottom that goes on the sill of the window. These guys here, I have a short video there that you can look at. These keep the lower sash from crashing at the head jamb, so that when the lower sash is raised, it leaves a gap between the head jamb and the bottom of this block that's this deep, and it just keeps the window hardware, the sash lock, from crashing into the head jamb. And if you look at that video, it explains a little more what's going on there, but that's just some leftover blocks. These are the pins I use to hold the sash chain when they're under weight, to keep them from popping back through the sash pulley and losing them. You use that for tearing stuff out and putting it back in. Basic nail set for setting your finish nails in your stop. You'll use a utility knife for cutting your weather strip, and that's explained in my reinstallation video, and so you can get details there, but that's what the utility knife is needed for. You'll need a Phillips and flathead screwdriver for the reinstallation of hardware. This little screwdriver here is nothing more than a pry bar for when you're cutting this material. It pinches, and basically in the miter you've got to open that pinch back up, and I just use that to stuff in there and twist. And here is just a punch that I've ground to a point, and use that to pre-punch the holes in the weather strip, so when I drive the nails it just goes in a whole lot easier. And then this board here is super important, and it is every 3 inches. You can see lines here. You really can't see my pencil marks anymore, but I measured it off every 3 inches. And so when I'm doing my weather strip, I set it on here, I flush it up to the end, and then based on the increment of holes that I want, I just look at this line punch, line punch, line punch. I'm never measuring anything. I never measured anything out when punching these holes or placing the nails. Once I did 1 or 2 windows, I had a really good system in what I wanted, and I used this board to measure off, and also that way I didn't damage any surface that I was punching on. And that's where I was using this guy to just come in here and punch that hole, so that when I put the nail in one that started, I didn't have to punch through the metal. Super critical piece. I got the idea off someone else's YouTube video, and you know, having something that is a little longer would be handy, but really this worked really well for me, and I don't have any complaints. All right, moving over here. These are actually for like doing trim coil work on a house for bending it, and I used this when I needed to bend the tongue on the weather strip to adjust it. It gave me, you know, that's 3, I think it's 3 or 4, I'm gonna say 3 inches wide, and I could flex it and permanently bend that tongue a little bit if I was having problems with the fit of the groove in the tongue being the part that I'm holding on to in the weather strip. You have 3 different sets of 10 snips. You know, you have your straights, and one of these is left, one of them's right. I'm not an expert on this stuff. And you can say, well, why do you need all that? Well, when you're cutting this and when you slice it, depending on which one of these you use, the burr will be on the finished surface where my thumb is now, or it'll be on the back surface. If you pay attention to which one you're using based on where you're cutting, you can push your burr to the back surface every time, and then you don't have to worry about it. If it comes up on the surface, then you may need to file that off depending on what you're doing. So it saves time. And that's why I have 3 sets here to do different directions. Here's just a basic metal file that I use to take the burr off that I just mentioned, and I use that a lot. I specifically did that when I clip these ends here, so that when you're raising that sash up and down, that burr is not just constantly scraping wood off the groove and making it sloppy. The more wood it scrapes off, the bigger the gap, the more air comes through. It's, you know, the whole purpose of putting this in here is to reduce the amount of airflow, and all you're doing is working against yourself. So I get back to here, and you see 3 hammers, and you're like, what do you need 3 hammers for reinstallation? Well, I have 2 different, these tools would be divided up into 2 workstations. One is on the floor where I'm trimming, cutting all my weather strip based off of measurements, and then I'm punching the holes. And to punch the holes, I need a hammer. So I have a hammer here. And I don't have to worry about having a hammer at that workstation right here. It's right here all the time. That's what this guy here was for. And then on my ladder, I had these 2 hammers. Now, technically, you get away with just using this guy. And I got this towards the end of the job. It's a upholsterer's tack hammer. And it's really nice when you're pinched in tight spaces. It allows you to get your nails nailed in between. You know, the size of that head is tiny compared to the size of that head. My problem with this hammer is it's very lightweight, so it takes a lot more effort to drive a nail. So I only used it in tight locations. Any place else I use this guy because it has more weight and it takes far less work to drive the nail. So that's why I have 3 hammers. So that's what you do, you know, and like here you can see where I've sanded the bottom of this hammer so it'd fit in the hole of my ladder. And, you know, don't hesitate to alter your ladder a little bit so you can hold all the tools you need so they're all right there and you don't have to question anything. But in general, this is all the tools I use to do the reinstallation. And the very last thing you'll see here, this is a line item for line item description of how to reinstall a window. And the reason I took the time to make these notes is because there are times when there would be 3 to 4 months go by in between removal and reinstallation, especially if I pulled a whole bunch of windows right before winter so that I could work on the windows in the shop or in my basement over winter so that they were ready for reinstallation when spring broke. And so I found that by creating these notes, I could read through them for 5 to 10 minutes before I started putting windows in, and I suddenly remembered some intricacies and nitnoid things that I forgot. And it just was a quick refresher because of the time span in between the work that I was doing. You might have no issues remembering things. I find that it helps to write things down. Helps me keep track of things. It also, you know, I have it for, you know, in 5 years, if I decide to help somebody with some windows or I have another window project to do myself, I can pull those up and take a quick look at them and kind of remember what I need to do. So this is a very unique process, and it's definitely something that you get extremely efficient at. I probably cut 20 to 30% of my reinstallation time down from the very first window I put in to the very last window. And I definitely didn't have all these tools set up at the very beginning. But I highly recommend creating your set of tools and keeping them dedicated to that deal, even if it means duplicating some of your tools for the efficiency of it. I'm a big fan of efficiency. and whatever makes the job easier, because you know, when you work on this for 2.5 years, you want to save any time you can. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you know, post in the comments. I'll be glad to answer them.